morning. I'm Rita Santamaria. I am the founder and CEO of Champion School of Real Estate, and I so welcome you to one of our monthly free complimentary interviews that will help your business improve. That is our goal every single month, is to give you wonderful nuggets of information that will help your business. And today I've gone a different direction. I've gone the direction of having Mr. Hank Moore here today. And not only is he a Pulitzer Prize author, he's also a very good friend. He is a national, if not international, icon. And for his presence to be here at Champion School of Real Estate, I'm just so thrilled and honored, because this gentleman is known all over by music icons, by world leaders, by corporate CEOs, and he is most definitely one of our favorite interviewees, because just during COVID, he was on CNN. He's been on Oprah. He knows Dick Clark. Beyonce wrote a wonderful testimonial in one of his books. So today, when we talk with Hank, it's going to be about the business side of real estate, mortgage, brokerage, appraisal, inspection, whatever your particular career direction is. Everything that Hank tells you today, I can tell you I try to use within Champion School of Real Estate. I love your books. We can get them on Amazon. We can get them from you.
Fine.
But you're going to tell us the best way to order your amazing books, Hank. And I just want to say to our new people that are watching today, that are in class, getting their license, this is the best way to start your career. Jot down all the ideas, all of the wonderful pieces, gems of information that Hank's going to give you, so that as you start your new career, or those that are watching that are in the middle of your career, we need to operate our business of real estate, loan, appraisal, inspection as a business.
Mm-hmm.
So let me just say to you, Mr. Hank Moore, welcome. And if you would just show our wonderful customers your first Pulitzer Prize book, your second, your third, your fourth. Okay.
Let's
start.
This was actually, it was my eighth book, I guess. Yeah, eighth book. I had written some others before that. And I had some business books, one called The Business Tree, one called The High Cost of Doing Nothing, another one called Power Stars to Light the Flame, the Visionaries in You, meaning you in business. That was a leadership book, a motivational book. And I wrote an entertainment book about the Hollywood film industry. It was called The Classic Television Reference. And that was the one that got me on Oprah years ago. And so then this one was my first Pulitzer Prize nominated book. That's book 9, Pop Icons and Business Legends. Then that was book 8. And then I have to think of the numbers of them because they're in order. This is book 9, my second, which is Nonprofit Legends. This one is my baby for the reason that I think whatever we do, I've been given a lot of great mentorship over the years. And one of my mentors used to say to me, you do your best work for free, meaning that the way that you do whatever volunteer things that you commit to do, that this is commensurate with the way that you're going to be very professional. And I built a lot of my career by being friends with top business leaders on the charity circuit. And sometimes the best deals you cut are at volunteer meetings and board meetings. And if people like you, they will admire you and they'll recommend you. And that's one of the things that the real estate community is really good at, is building relationships and sustaining them.
We have in all of our books that you need to get yourself associated with a charity, a group, a club, and volunteer.
Mhm.
Because you're giving back to the community that you hope gives you business.
Mhm.
And so it's a win-win-win.
None of us are in business to give all of our time away, but when we do, we want to make it count. We want to make sure that in your planning, which I'll talk about that a little bit, strategic planning is not a dirty term. It's a very nice term. It's a very success-oriented term. And when you do your planning for your business, make sure that your charitable and volunteer involvement is strategized in advance for the year. Decide which charities you're going to support this year, next year, the year
So
after.
budgeting for those particular
It's complete,
charities.
just like you would budget your time. You
Mhm.
budget your most important resource. Part of it is your time. Part of it is whatever monetary contributions. But I recommend a lot of people in business and in the real estate community don't make cash donations, make in-kind donations. Find new creative ways. One of the best things people in real estate could do is on your website, put a little corner, something at the bottom of the website, a little page called the Charity Corner, and talk about the thing and show pictures of yourself doing good guy things in the community.
I love that. I hope everyone wrote that down, because honestly, we're going to do that at Champion School of Real Estate.
Yeah.
We give. And our industry knows that. We have it in our catalog, but on the website, having that and showing where we
Yeah.
are and what we're doing is huge.
I know.
It's huge. So,
It is.
and remember as well, students, customers, friends, that when this interview is over, it will be on YouTube, so you can watch Hank again. So sorry to interrupt.
And some other ones that we did. The last one we did during COVID was a year and a half ago by Zoom, and that was we covered a lot of other material. There's plenty of material to cover. And then the next books that I did, my 10th book, this was my third Pulitzer nomination. And I'm not really here to sell the books. I'm explaining what
I want
led
our
to them.
students to
Yeah.
consider if they have the opportunity to purchase my favorite. And I just saw a chat from Randy Smith, one of our lead senior instructors, who's actually on vacation this week, but he's watching today. And he was saying the business series is his favorite.
Yeah. Problem with business, a lot, and this is, it's so true. Too many companies want to look like someone else. They don't know how to be their own best. And what I learned through charitable and volunteer work was how to be your own best, and then take it into the corporate realm and make your career, how you're going to brand yourself for the rest of your career. And part of it you do by your volunteer work, part of it you do by your professional development work, part of it you do by your involvement in trade and professional associations,
which we're very strong at Champions.
And many of them, WCR and a lot of them. I mean, I've spoken to a lot of those chapters. I love them.
And they love you.
Yeah, it's just, they're the backbone of everything that's going on now and for the generations. One of the most important things about business that's robust, if you think of it that way, and I do, is that there are 6 generations now in the workforce, which is more than we've ever had in any part in our history.
So let me ask you
6
this,
generations.
because I know the answer, but I'm going to ask you anyway. Your books, are they formulated for Gen Y, Gen Z? Tell me about that.
Gen Y and Gen Z, because and maybe some Gen X. It's a long story. We've all, during our earlier years in business, growing up and coming along, we had to put up with a lot of people with obsolete ideas. and we became the beacons of the future. And the problem with too many people in business, most of what they're teaching at colleges and universities is usually 2 generations behind. They're still teaching the captain of industry style of business, which went out of style in the 1920s. And that was replaced by building work teams. That was later replaced by customer service. The current style of business, customer focused management, has been the dominant style of business for 20 years. And a lot of people in business still don't know that because they're still operating under the captain of industry style business, which was a 1890s Victorian style of business that continued through the 1920s and which helped cause the Great Depression. Another topic that's covered in this book, by the way. Every crisis except for the current one is in here. The Great Depression, the economic downturns, what we should have learned from every recession, that's all in volume 1.
Well, let me ask you this, because we talked about it earlier, and I think it is just remarkable that during COVID, you wrote 2 books, correct? Or 1.5?
And pieces of others. Yeah, 2. The equivalent of 2.
And the one that I think amazes me is he has the pop music legends, and then he also has the other one on pop culture.
Yeah.
And what is so
this
incredible?
Is the companion.
There it is.
They're companions of each other.
What is so remarkable, I don't know if you can see that. I'm putting it the wrong direction. But what is so surprising to me, and I use the word incredible, but we have information here that helps us in our business based on things like the songs that you like, based on explain how that is a holdover to CEOs and corporation leaders, how music they like actually helps sort of expose the type of leadership they need to be. How does that work?
Well, most of us are more products of the pop culture in which we grew up than we are formal business training. People then go to school, and if what they're teaching you is 2 generations of business style behind, you're being taught wrong stuff to begin with. I mean, when I was in college in the 60s, they were all teaching economics, but they never talked about everything that I do for a living, which is, overhaul corporations, reconfigure the boards of directors, all that stuff. They don't teach you any of that stuff. So that's why I started writing the Big Picture of Business series, was to cover all the stuff that I and others were never taught. And then that's what, that's the rest of that series. That's Big Picture Book 2, and that's Book 3. And then this came out, Book 3 came out, which I think is what we talked about on the podcast the last time.
We did.
Just as COVID, this came out just before COVID broke. So I was getting ready to do the music series, which I'd been postponing for over 5 years. And I had to do a book 4 to talk about business recovery since COVID. This is my 6th Pulitzer.
Let's talk about that. Business recovery since COVID. It doesn't get any more up to date than that.
No.
I can't even imagine putting a book together of that quality, talking about business after COVID. Tell us about it.
Well, a lot of people, and today, I mean, a lot of people want to believe that COVID is in the rearview mirror. It is not. And the mindsets that caused people to think that way are still with us. There are people that still believe that lessons they should have, let's take the last major crisis was the economic downturn of 2008, 2009. A lot of
people call it the housing crisis.
Of course. And there were housing crises before, in the early 80s, and everything's very cyclical. Part of it is to understand that business trends are a little different from economic trends, but that they all go through cycles and they don't necessarily at the same time. And so a lot of people during COVID were thinking, oh, well, this is going to be with us for a month and then we'll all go back to normal.
Exactly.
That mindset is what caused people to let their guards down and start going, acting as though they were.
We hadn't gone through a pandemic before.
We hadn't gone through a lot of things before. A crisis hitting an organization and an economy. Sometimes it's more than just an airplane hitting a building in New York City. We hadn't been through that. Mm-hmm. We all learned to collectively learn and grow. But what we learn from each crisis is that people can be resilient, they can change, they can learn to collaborate, they can learn to work together, and maybe they'll do things a little differently. It is my professional opinion, to be real honest about business during and after COVID, that about 25% of those companies that went under probably should have, probably weren't prepared to go the distance. They weren't prepared to be resilient enough. I run into, that's one of the things that I like about the real estate and community of professionals. Everyone started out probably as something else and they evolved. I've got a lot of friends that and it's the same way I feel, by the way, about people who manage nonprofit organizations. They didn't start out working for charities. People in real estate have worked in other kinds of industries. They've been in other forms of business. They've evolved their careers. They're smart enough to come get the kind of training with working with Champion School of Real Estate and have solid foundations. A lot of people that are probably taking courses now and watching this program as part of it had previous business education in colleges umpteen years ago, and they were taught styles of business that were totally obsolete umpteen years ago, but they didn't have, one of the innovations in continuing education and distance learning. I first wrote about distance learning in the year 1970, and people kept saying, oh, that's never going to replace.
Well, you are a futurist, that's for sure.
It was...
What was distance learning in the 70s?
It was videotaping
okay.
classes with big, bulky equipment and playing them elsewhere. And about that time, we learned to use satellite technology. Everything that's happened in the 1990s and 2000s had its root in things that were being done experimentally in the 60s and 70s. It's just the public didn't know about that. They didn't know that you could link computers together. I was 40 years old before I ever worked on a computer myself. And I was a futurist, but I was hunting and pecking on a typewriter for the first, 30 years of my career.
Well, let me interrupt you for just a minute and let our students know. Hank was, I'm going to say, the youngest consultant to a president in history.
Yeah.
He was a consultant to LBJ in the White House. I also want to say that I have a quote here. Well, I'll just find it on my paper from Lady Bird Johnson. Hank Moore speaks from the brain and from the heart. I've personally observed his futuristic projections and insights. Obviously, what a compliment from Lady Bird. I know she even fixed grilled cheese sandwiches for you in their home out in the hill country.
She was my first mentor.
Your first mentor.
Yeah, I was 10 years old and I started my career as a radio disc jockey. I wanted to be the Dick Clark of Texas radio, and I worked for the Johnson radio station in Austin. And I was playing the hits of the day, the golden age of rock and roll. That's why my interest in everything started with my interest in music, and it kept going. And I wanted to maintain a long-term career in business. And Lady Bird called me over. Actually, the first meal she cooked for me was pancakes for breakfast in her kitchen. And she called me over and she said, "You are a visionary. You are a humanitarian." And then she slyly smiled, "Now grow into the roles." In other words, she was giving my younger self my best advice, and it took me many years to grow into that advice. And so she said, and then as time went on, she said, "You do understand this running a radio station is how we make our money. This is in music and being a DJ and all that, that's for young people. You're evolving into other things." And I said, "What?" And she said, "Well, someday my husband's going to be president and we want you to be a White House advisor." I didn't know what that meant. Mm-hmm. So I went from age 10, my first job being a radio DJ, and I was groomed for the next 5 years. And then when he became president, after Kennedy's assassination, I was 16 years old at the time. And no one ever asked me during the entire 5.5 years that he was president, and I'd go around the White House. I was never old enough to vote for anybody, but I sure could think up policy ideas because people let me. And that's my thing about young people. We are all, if we really think about it, young people at heart. And we continue and we add the knowledge and the wisdom, but we always be youthful, by refreshing ourselves, that's professional development, and passing it on to others, mentoring other young people. So that's why I'm so excited about sharing all this with generations X, Y, and Z.
Well, I also want everyone to know that Hank was also a consultant for George Bush when he was president in the White House with his, what was it called? The
1,000 Points of Light.
1,000 Points of Light. And then moving into the big picture of business with those books, obviously that evolved over the years. And the number of corporations that you have spoken to, Disney, Marriott, Shell Oil, I mean, it is a Schlumberger. It is an amazing list. I think 50 or so out of the Fortune 500 companies you've spoken to.
And advised on strategy, 100 actually.
And I should say actually consulting and advised, not spoken to.
There were many I spoke to that didn't want to listen to me and didn't want to do the planning. I mean, sometimes you got to understand that. And I wrote a chapter in one of my business books called The Fine Art of Failure, and which is we learn 3 times more from failure than from success. Usually other people's failure, sometimes our own. But when we go back and really study, and that's what, people listening today and watching, you can think back to some of the biggest mistakes that you made in business. And if you had known what you know now, you probably wouldn't have made them. Crisis management and preparedness, when we go back to talk about business crises, there's all kinds of crises that can, and there's that chapter on that in one of the books. I think it's book 2. If you go back and think of what you're going to do to avert the next crisis, that's your crisis management and
that's
planning.
The futuristic thinking also is how do we look forward to avert that same situation from happening again. So when you're called in to consult, let's say you're called in to actually give constructive criticism about the leadership in a company. Okay. How do you deliver, let's say, constructive criticism to the CEO of the company or one of the leaders of the company? How do you do that knowing you're paid to be fully transparent, and yet you're going to tell the CEO how they need to improve. How do you do that?
But it took me a lot of years of begging for their approval. And I had to learn, if you go in as the expert, and it's not to tell them what to do, it's to give them the methodologies to make the change, to help them think that they're their own ideas. So you can do that by, and sometimes I ask all these song lyric questions, because most CEOs can't tell you their core values. They have to be told by somebody what the next set of values are. So I would sit, and you brought up the song lyric thing of at where the great ideas came from. There's a chapter in this book, the current book, Big Picture Business Book 4, the end of that series, called Scraps of Paper. How scraps of paper and random thoughts created masterful new businesses. And when I was writing that chapter 4 years ago, my wife and I jokingly referred to that as the barf bag chapter. Because some of the top strategic plans that I have written for corporations, including Hewlett Packard, Marriott, started on the back of barf bags on airplanes.
Wow.
That's where you grab a piece of paper and you write things down. And so every time that I would talk to top CEOs, they'd say, "Oh, I got to write that down." And you're having lunch with someone and they write it down. And in this book, I showed how Bill Gates wrote his original plan for Microsoft on the back of a takeout Chinese menu. How Rod Canyon.
That's when he was inspired.
Yeah, and it for designed the compact computer on the back of a House of Pies placemat. House of Pies down on Kirby Drive.
Wow.
A great breakfast place. He was having breakfast there, and the only piece of paper handy was a House of Pies placemat.
Now, what book is that in?
This book. It's the Scraps of Paper chapter. We don't use the term barf bag in it. But actually, there's a picture of a barf bag with the program. I mean, I remember one time working with Hewlett Packard, and it's on the back of that where I said, I was traveling with a couple of people on the plane, and I said, your problem is you give to way too many consulting services. Why don't you have a consulting division? We never thought of it. So I'm jotting on a barf bag. I mean, when I did the original, came up with the original concept of my business tree, concept of the 7 parts of it and all of that, I jotted that down on a scrap of paper from a VHS videotape. Remember, most people are too young to know what videotapes were, but when you buy one, it's a blank one to record stuff off of TV, like we did back in the 1980s and 90s. There was always a thing of paper with, if you wanted to take the labels off of it. So I created that on a VHS tape scrap.
Well, you've made a couple of good points that I want to restate to our students because they're so valuable. And one point being, what are your core values? Stop and really evaluate and think, what are the core values going to be in my profession? And what is my mission statement going to be?
Exactly.
And have that as your guideline, almost a very simple outline. And then you're talking about scraps of paper and writing down ideas and these amazing, amazing multi-billionaires that started their business. You don't have to make it a formalized business plan. You don't have to make it a formalized commitment to whatever your particular direction is, but jot down the direction you want to go. Jot down what your ideas are. How I'm going to ask you this. How do you, as a real estate company, a real estate broker, an agent, how do you distinguish yourself from the competition? Is that in one of your books?
Oh, it's in every book. There's always one. I mean, some people call it creating their personal brand. It's understanding what you like and admire. I mean, when I started working in radio, my one of my other early mentors was Bill Moyers, who later, was a fixture on PBS. But when I knew him, he was a 24-year-old newscaster at the radio station, and I was a 10-year-old disc jockey. And I had just interviewed Elvis Presley, the biggest star in America, on live radio, and I thought, hey, I'm hot stuff. And he said, if you can't take the dirtiest job and do it better, he said, first of all, suck it up. You're not going to be Dick Clark the rest of your life. You can like him, you can admire him, and we all have idols that we have, but we can't be them. We can embody some of their ideals.
That's a great point.
And I mean, two of the biggest named Dick Clark proteges that modeled their entire careers off of Dick Clark are two of the biggest stars on TV now, Ryan Seacrest and Carson Daly, and I mean, they even used the Dick Clark salute at the end of the show. Anyway, what I learned was to take what I liked and admired and move it forward. And when you come up with your personal vision, you want to think about, what one of the things sometimes when I'm working with people, I'll say, write down very quickly the top 10 things that you've ever learned meant the most to you in your career.
The top 10 things that meant the most to you.
Yeah, and sometimes if I have time, I'll give them a sheet of paper who ask them things like, what was your age at the time when you learned that lesson? What was their age? What was the intended target of their message? And what have you since interpolated over the years of how that stuck with you? So when Bill Moyer said to me, suck it up, you're not going to be Dick Clark, that's fine. So I learned how to be my own best self. And then Lady Bird interjected, or he also said, if you can't take the dirtiest job in any company and do it better than anyone else, you'll never be management, because being a worker bee, there are 30 gradations of the workforce out there. And most people are stuck in the bottom rungs because they're just trying to do enough to get by and eking. And only when you get to the mid level, moving upward, do you start becoming more advanced. So that's when you start upgrading your professional development, thus Champion School of Real Estate, thus next careers. Then you understand what you learn from nonprofit involvement. You interpolate the pop culture lessons that you learned from your favorite songs and how they appeal to your career. So then you move up to where then you become a leader. Then you become an opinion leader, then you become an opinion influencer, and then on and on and on. Then you start creating your own ideas. Most people can't write books. And, a lot of the books, well, that's another subject. There's a lot of junk out there too. And, vanity things that people do. There's not new original material, but you learn and you grow. And one of the things Moyer said, well, I'm going to make sure you do the dirtiest job. Well, the dirtiest job, I was feeling my oats. I just met the king of rock and roll, Elvis Presley, and I thought I was going to be hot stuff. And I was going to make it on the American Bandstand as a guest DJ. I did later, but I did it because I was a business visionary who still liked music, not because I was stuck in a radio DJ mode. Because everybody burns out from that.
So let me tell you what I'm getting from the conversation, and correct me if I'm wrong. I'm getting that you can start at the very beginning, let's say the bottom. If you're willing to do what you call the dirty work, and you are willing to not think right away you're going to be the top leader in the company, if you're willing to take the necessary steps and stay focused, at some point you will eventually be where you want to be. You're not Dick Clark, but you have your own wonderful persona that has serviced you well. Is that what?
And
What we're driving at now.
continues growing. I mean, you learn from that. And what Moyer's taught me also was how you do the dirtiest job. Well, the dirtiest job at the time was being the radio public service director. That was in the good old days of regulated radio, when radio stations had to give away free time to the community, had to address community issues in order to get their renewal of their license from the FCC in Washington. And I used to write the FCC renewal forms. So I knew how to fill out the forms to say, this is what we have determined. And I learned a term when I was 10 years old, which I still pass along to people in small and emerging businesses. And the term is community ascertainment. You go out and ascertain what the marketplace is thinking, what they're feeling, what they see on the horizon, and then you ask, what can we do to be a part of that process? Then what you find by asking people in business and in the community what they think, they suddenly think more of you, and they're more likely to refer you for business because they respect that you ask.
You're already ahead of the game.
That's community ascertainment, right? And so I would go over with a pad and paper and talk to these people. And then, and many of them were, ministers and on the other side of town and things like that. And years later, when I got my first White House assignment, I was on the committee that wrote the Civil Rights Act. And half the committee that was there to write the first draft were people I had met 5 years earlier on the community ascertainment circuit. That's the continuum of a good career or multiple careers. That's another subject. It used to be said that the average person has 3 careers in them. They really have 7 now. And that it's that 7th one of being the elder statesman, influencer, peak that I was told I was going to go in that direction, but the art and skill with what you do on the way up is what. So you think about what your end game is going to be, but with not thinking of it as an end game, but as a continuum. One of the people that this book, this was my 8th book, there's Walt Disney there on the cover, along with Bill Gates and Burt Bacharach and all these people. And I met Walt Disney when I was 17 years old. And he said, and I happened to be in Washington, D.C. Now, you keep thinking, what is a 17-year-old child doing away from school in Washington, D.C.? I was there for the presidential inauguration. And all of these celebrities, were there to attend, right? So I'm sitting in this waiting room, and we're getting ready to go into a hotel luncheon. And there's Disney sitting there. He was a chain smoker, just smoking like a chimney. People smoked cigarettes back in those days. And that's something I never did, but never needed to, because my fuel came from good ideas, learning them, sharing them, and sometimes taking them out of context. So we're sitting there on his couch, and Disney, chain smoker, he died a year and a half later of lung cancer, as it turned out. But he said, kid, don't forget this. There are 7 creative ways to regenerate a good idea. And if it doesn't have that many arms and legs to it, it's not a good idea. That's profound stuff to be discussing with a child. So
what were they?
Well, the 7 ways are how you reinvent your career, how you move up from a career standpoint, how your business goes through 6 and 7. He used the number 6. I use the number 7 now. But 7 is in all my books. 7 stages of growth, 7 stages of crisis recovery, 7 stages of this, and this. Anyway, so he said that. But what he meant with a good idea, regenerating a good idea, was how you take it into other media. And in the 1960s, we were already talking. He was already thinking cable TV. He was already thinking internet. Well, they didn't use that word at the time. They said the world is going to be much more connected. And I said to him, sir, you have a hit song out right now in one of your cartoons called It's a Small World After All. He said, exactly. That song is really about the growth of technology and the growth of humanity, and let's hope they grow together.
Wow.
He said that to me. So sitting on the other side of the couch was this guy, Howard Hughes, the crazy business guru. He said, kid, I have an idea for you too. I said, yes, sir, Mr. Hughes. Turned around. He said, keep a pocket full of note cards and write this stuff down that you hear from people like us. He said, you're going to come up with book series one day.
Oh my goodness.
And and this was in 1965.
Wow.
And so you learn what you learn. When you learn it, then you give a new coat of paint. That's where corporate visions and corporate reorganizations.
So keeping what you've learned and then bringing it up to date and current, but constantly reinventing what you know works. And what I know works are the business books that you've put together. Yeah. There are a couple of things I want to go back to. I want to go back to your business tree, because when Hank talks about the business tree, for me, the most visual picture is something that you had in writing that said, it's not about the limbs, it's not about the leaves, it's about the entire tree. That is very symbolic to me, and obviously to you, and that's why you go off of that. So within a company, we have to think about, yes, all the different entities and parts that make up that company, but it's the whole that has to be fertilized, watered, fed in order to stay strong. You talk in one of your books about what we learned from the pandemic. And if you can tell us again in just a couple of paragraphs, or what did we learn? What is the overall
We learned
lesson?
that we should have valued our employees more, and we should have treated them more like heroes sooner rather than later. We learned that we should look at the warning signs of what the worst could have happened if we hadn't changed, what we needed to learn to do to grow. We also learned that we need other people. One of the things that I've long respected about the real estate community is its insistence on being inclusive, sharing ideas with more people. I mean, you don't see this in accounting circles and with other professions that are we keep, the way it always used to be, and this is the way we're going to do it. There's never been, and that's one of the things I respect about the music industry. It's based on change. It's based on evolving from year to year to year, not just sitting around and thinking, well, maybe in 10 years we'll change. That's what causes businesses to go out of business. And I think the last thing that we learned is, where are you going moving forward? How are you going to handle the next crisis? And for a small business, the next crisis could be a cash shortfall by a key customer who can't pay a bill, the loss of key customers, a sexual harassment lawsuit in a small company. I mean, all kinds of issues. There are, and research tells us, and I've written about that in one of the books. Actually, I'd written an entire book about that years ago called The High Cost of Doing Nothing.
That's where I was going next.
That's
my favorite title.
Nothing, and that was one of my earlier books, and I summarized that in a chapter in Big Picture of Business, book 2. I did go back and summarize some of the earlier work succinctly and updated, and the high cost of doing nothing is thinking this. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Keep things the way they seem, or what we think were the same. Most people want to go back to what was, and they don't really remember what was. So when I talked to your question earlier about asking, what are your core values? And I would ask these corporations, what was the joy that brought you into business is often one of my questions. And then the next one after that was, how did you fall out of love with your business? How long did you keep marking time?
Mm-hmm.
And by then it's dying. And that's why I said 25% of the businesses that went out of business during the COVID period, a long time ago, long time before that. And so, and then the last comment I'd say about business recovery from COVID is always think about what's next. I have another concept that I write about called 3 rights offset a wrong. We don't want to live in a constant state of doom and gloom. We can't as human beings do that. We can't as businesses, but we can think about how we're going to work together with each other a little better. One of the best things I would recommend for everybody watching today is sit down and write just a 1-page document to yourself, and then turn around and share it with your customers on some of the business lessons I learned through the pandemic. You don't have to write books, you don't have to write umpteen chapters on these subjects, but then you turn around and that becomes your year-end letter of thanks and appreciation to customers and suppliers and people within your supply chain. That's what makes for stronger supply chain management. That's what makes for recovering businesses, is a willingness to learn what we just went through and maybe interpolate that to what could be in the future. People say, and say to me all the time, you write all these fun stuff and you tell these great anecdotes about the old days and good old days. It's not to live in the past. It's to learn from what worked then and redefine it. And that's why my new book series this book is coming out, Pop Music Legends, where I talk about, that's my 14th book, and maybe if I'm lucky that will be my 7th Pulitzer nominated book. But you don't do it for the awards. It's not about awards. You don't get anything from it. But
very nice
a pat on the back to be recognized because they're different ideas.
Yes.
And I'm trying to educate generations Y and Z on everything that happened in music 100 years before their time, moving up. And when they hear that some person affected someone else who affected someone else who affected someone else. I mean, everyone on the cover of this book came from everybody from, Bob Dylan, Beyonce, the Beatles, Frank Sinatra, Lady Gaga. They're all here, and they all learn from each other, and they acknowledge what they learned from those before them.
You told me when we first met this morning, we know that Olivia Newton-John passed away yesterday.
Yes.
And just randomly, because he's such an amazing researcher, he was saying, well, Beyonce, Lady Gaga, they all learned certain things from those pop icons of the past, like Olivia Newton-John.
And Lady Gaga, for example, who's, clearly one of the leading people in music now, Olivia Newton-John was one of her role models. Her other role models growing up, that's the thing, when you meet them or you talk to them, you always ask them, who were your influences? I mean, one of the biggest stars in rock, Rod Stewart, his role models were Al Jolson and Bing Crosby. And the Beatles, of course, their role models were, Buddy Holly and Chuck Berry and all those other guys, and whose role models were the Sinatras of their era. It's a continuum. And one of the things, there's one of the chapters in this book, not to get into that book too much, there's a chapter that I wrote about 4 years ago for that book on Christmas music. The one time of the year that you ever hear Bing Crosby's voice on the radio is when? Christmas. And people don't know about the Bing Crosby of the 1930s and 40s unless they start watching all those wonderful movies. But But you think of him as the voice of Christmas because he is, and he was since the 1930s. But here you've got, Mariah Carey, who's on the cover too, is considered the queen of modern Christmas because of a record she made 25 plus years ago that suddenly came back to the charts and during COVID was the top Christmas record of the year, and it was a record she had made over 25 years earlier. That's the continuum. At the holiday season, you hear Andy Williams on the radio, an artist that you would never hear any other time in any format. And suddenly, everybody's sharing ideas and music.
How you've taken these artists whom you know,
yeah,
and you've taken the idea of music and great leaders, icons, and you make us stop and think how some of our most creative moments is when we're listening to music, some of our saddest moments listening to music, the why of that, and also how we can take music that we love and also movies that we love and sort of internalize that display the person we are. My favorite, again, are these books right here, because when you are an independent contractor, as we all are, we're our own bosses.
Yeah.
These are the legends. I love the nonprofit legends book.
Yeah.
Learn a lot from that. But the 4 big pictures of business, ideas and strategies, I just want to say, I personally, as I've written you many notes to say, I use them. They are very inclusive of everything. And so today, when Hank and I first greeted each other and said hello, I said to him, Hank, these books, and again, to have people like Beyonce giving you her testimonial to pop culture and your book and how you've written it. But I picked up one of these books and I said, without question, your books, your materials will be in the Smithsonian one day. And he said, without question.
Yeah.
And it doesn't get any more valid than that.
They're already in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. I mean, even business books. They put me in. They said, even though you write about business, you still have some entertainment in each book.
Yeah. A remarkable compliment. Yeah. But they are good, solid pieces of information to the point that during COVID, he was on a couple of national news shows talking about the corporate industry and how the pandemic is affecting it. I know CNN was one of them.
There were podcasts and things too, including the one I did with you. But you constantly, you jot those ideas and you think of how you're going to pay it forward for the future.
And I think being futuristic, if anything very basic came out of our discussion today, we have the wonderful reference materials that are so helpful. We have, I call it like the enjoyment, but you're still learning from the pulp culture. But I just really believe that we can learn so much by stopping and thinking, what's going to happen down the road? Am I prepared for the next cycle? And if so, how am I going to deal with it? And your business books go into all of the cycles, and they're just absolutely a must read for people that are going to be their own business, their own entrepreneurs. You already are, and you are just one of our icons that I am so proud of. So that being said, looking back, your younger self, meeting Elvis at 10 years old, and Walt Disney, Howard Hughes, certainly president, certainly music icons, because they're all quoted with pictures in his books. Is there any advice that you might have looked back to give to your younger self that might have changed anything in your life? Or do you feel like it's just happened the way that it needed to happen?
Well, it's Lady Bird set me on the right path to begin with. No, it didn't happen as fast as, and there was a time that I would think, what's next? Well, it's up to all of us to make what's next and how we
Good
reinvent
statement.
ourselves. And sometimes I sit around and even I get a regret or two from time to time, but the regret is that too many other people that I've had to work with and that I've tried to work with don't get it. And it hurts me sometimes that people are so hard-headed that they don't want to change, that they fight, they resist. And I used to keep a file folder of those great ideas that I would offer to companies, and they went over their heads. They didn't understand it. Often I called that lessons learned but not soon forgotten. That became a chapter in one of these books where I talked about how some of the best ideas were either pitched to the wrong people at the wrong time, on the wrong circumstances. And sometimes you keep those ideas and you turn around and sell them to another client down the road. That's it's not quite that way that you pluck ideas, but sometimes that's what you have to do. And there's timing. I had written something about the stages of how we do ourselves in and how we give people too many ideas too early. We give them the wrong things. And it still hurts me that a lot of people are their own worst enemy.
Those particular words we use from time to time in the classroom where the instructor is teaching how to make money in real estate and talking the basics. And it really bothers us that our new people aren't writing those down. And yes, they are in the book, but it's always the thought, well, I'm going to reinvent the wheel. Well, okay, reinvent the wheel, but also take these tried and true pieces of good information and work on those as well.
Yeah, you readapt the wheel to you. You customize it.
You customize.
That's what makes you stand out. Everybody has competition. You know who my biggest competition is misinformation. And I started writing all these books because no one else was. And I mean, my God, if you look at where people, and there's a chapter on that in the book, where people get their business education. And the first 2 or 3 levels are terrible levels. Most people get everything they did through hearsay, through secondhand, through third hand, from things they read on the internet, most of which are wrong. I mean, internet websites are filled with misinformation, big surprise. And, very rarely do people decide, I want to hire an advisor to really help me ground my business. I do something, people go, the surprise, even working with small business, it's called a institutional review, just sometimes asking some of the basic questions that the other advisors never would have thought to ask. And where are you going? How are you going to go? Who's going to help you get there? How are you going to reward them? How are you going to breed cooperation? One thing Champions is good about doing is inspiring long-term relationships. Not only some of these people go through these classes, it's like they come back. They should come back for a class reunion every few years. It's that cohesive a business body of knowledge that you've got here. And that's why people come here. That's why they stay, and they should keep coming back. There should be an alumni association. The alumni association is a bunch of successful people in real estate, but they can still come together and acknowledge and come in occasionally and meet and greet the young people.
What we always do is invite our brokers to come in regularly, meet and greet. With the monthly interviews, we take our successful agents in real estate from all over and bring them in, just as we did you today, to talk about their success stories, what they do in order to be the success they are, whether it is San Antonio, Austin, Dallas, Fort Worth, Houston, Midland, Odessa, El Paso, the Valley, all over. And that being said, next 2 weeks, on August the 23rd, we have one of our superstars from San Antonio coming in to talk about the luxury market tomorrow straight. And we'll get to interview her on the luxury market and how that works for her. And Champions then takes all of our superstar people and we put them into our Success Series books. We take the interviews and bring it down into print on Secrets to Success. And then for new people or people that want to improve their income level, I have 30 Days to Success in Real Estate, how to start out and keep growing your business. But I want to go back over here. How do our wonderful students watching purchase a Hank Moore book, if not all of the 4 business series and the pop culture? How is the best way to purchase?
Well, for this group, I'm going to give you a direct email address. I don't do that too often. I mean, don't go to Amazon. And I say that's not against Amazon, but 97% of the time research tells us people say they're going to Amazon, never do. I'm going to give you a direct email. Send me an email with your contact information. I will then send you information on how to get a signed, autographed copies of the book, and then you can, pay by, PayPal or something. And it's H Moore, HMOORE at silverfox.org, silverfox.org. Hank Moore at silverfox.org. And then if you'll do that, and then we'll send you the information, hmore at silverfox.org. I have other email addresses, but that'll get you there directly. And then we'll send you the information. I know people, there's no way otherwise. You can order through websites and all that kind of stuff, but you're still not going to know. And surprisingly, people miss opportunities because they missed the wrong book or they didn't get whatever. And then especially when Pop Music Legends comes out, then you'll know, we'll let you know that it is now in the market. It'll be out within about another month.
Well, you are one of my icons. You're one of my legends. And before we leave today, I want to also do a shout out to another person very important to our company, Kimberly Dydalowitz, who offices in the North Dallas Plano market. And Kimberly is the president of our company, and just this month celebrating 24 years within Champions School of Real Estate, has helped in the growth and development of our company to the max. And we could not be the company we are without our incredible managers, our career counselors, our online department, as well as our live broadcast. Everyone within our Champions School of Real Estate, with our dedicated, incredible instructors and quality textbooks, make us a legend in the real estate industry. Thank you so much for that. Without your business students, we don't have one. So thank you for your business. Hank Moore, I'm so impressed with who you are and so happy to call you friend. I highly endorse all of his amazing books. So for now, see you in a couple of weeks, the 23rd of August, when we talk to you tomorrow from San Antonio. Bye-bye.
Bye.